Assessing risk in sport. This video will provide evidence for BTEC Level 3, Unit 3, Assignment 2. In any sports performance, it is inevitable that there will be an injury of some description. It is the responsibility of all providers of sport, for example leisure centres, PE departments or the event organisers, to make sure that they have done everything they can to safeguard you whilst you take part in sport. The main element of safeguarding comes through a risk assessment. The aim of a risk assessment is to eliminate something that has the potential to cause harm, otherwise known as a hazard. It is designed to minimise the likelihood of harm occurring, known as the risk, but most importantly, it is there to protect participants from harm by following a risk assessment procedure and implementing changes. A risk assessment is a document that every member of staff needs to be aware of and have read. It is a working document that needs updating regularly, especially if there has been a change to the facility, like our new climbing wall in our school sports hall, or if there has been a change to the activity that you intend to take place. Here I'm going to show you an example of a risk assessment for an activity, and that activity is badminton. Once you've recorded the activity and the area in which you're doing that activity, and you've considered the people who may be at risk, the main part of your risk assessment is considering the hazards. There's three main areas to the hazards that you need to consider. Having a good understanding of the people that will be involved in the activity will help you prevent injury. This could include different players, spectators, centre staff, and all different groups of different ages need to be considered to reduce the likelihood of injury. The next thing to be considered is the equipment. So having a good understanding of the equipment you require for your activity and of the environment, which is the area in which you will be taking part of that activity, you will be able to reduce the risks to as minimal as possible. 1 being the lowest risk and 5 being the highest risk. Once you have rated the likelihood of risk for any particular hazard on a score of 1 to 5, and the severity of the injury that could be caused for that hazard on a scale of 1 to 5, you can multiply them to get a risk rating. A risk rating then means that you must decide what control measures should take place. Control measures are also measured on a scale, and you start off, the higher the risk rating, the higher the control measure. So a high risk rating of between 15 and 20 should mean that you do not do the activity. Then you go down the risk ratings to modify the activity to make it safe. What can you do to protect participants to make it safe? What can you do to provide safety equipment to make it safe? What can you do to provide appropriate training to make it safer? And provide appropriate supervision to make it safer. If in doubt, do not do the activity. Put in control measures until you reduce the risk to a safe level. So here I've completed a risk assessment form on the 24th of January for a badminton activity taking place in the sports hall. So I've identified the area and the activity that's taking place. For my risk assessment, I've now thought about the people at risk, and I understand that there will be participants using the venue, and they will be aged between 7 all the way up to adults. There will occasionally be parents who might come to spectate my activity. There could be cleaners, there could be PE staff, there could be coaching staff on site whilst I'm doing my badminton activity. There could also be some level 3 diploma students volunteering to support in the activity, and the caretakers may be called for another issue in the sports hall at the time that badminton activity is going on. So the hazards for my risk assessment have been broken down into people, equipment and environment. So 2 examples of people that I'm considering things that affect people, is if a player was to collide with another player in the sports hall. A player who is not currently on the court might get a bench with some other students and move it to sit on a bench where it wasn't originally set up. So this is a change that would happen during the session that I would have to keep my eye on. Students might be lifting equipment and they could cause themselves equipment lifting injuries. So if they don't lift it correctly, for example lifting the posts, the heavy bases on the bottom, and they might also use the wrong size equipment. So in this instance I'm talking about the fact that I've got very small children who I intend to work on one court with the miniature rackets and sponge balls, and I've got some more advanced older children that I intend to put on a different court with full length rackets and normal shuttlecocks. I've also thought about the environment, and if there's another activity going on and the sports hall's been divided in half, there could be an issue of some of the equipment or some students coming through onto my activity, which is the badminton, in the other half. There could also be an issue if there is a slippery court. So having understood some of the hazards and thought them through, I'm then looking at the likelihood of that hazard taking place. And 1 means that it's very low, or the likelihood is very low, and number 5 means that the likelihood is very high for that taking place. Then I've looked at the severity, so how severe the consequences would be if that did take place. And again, 1 is low with no real injury, and 5 goes all the way up to a life-threatening injury. And to do that, I then get a rating where I multiply the likelihood by the severity. I have to also, because there is a rating here, there is a risk, I have to look at what control measures can I put in place to minimise that and make it as safe as possible. So the first hazard I talked about was a player crashing into another player. Now I've said this is a likelihood of 2, which means it is unlikely to happen because I intend to set the activities up correctly first place, spreading the children out and putting the right children with the right age group. I also intend to have spectators either refereeing or sitting at the very back on benches against the wall. So the severity is 2, which I'm saying would cause, if that did happen, it would cause a minor injury. So if they crashed into each other, a minor injury could be caused. They could bang their heads, they could hit each other with a racket, they could fall over each other, cuts, bruises, but I'm classing that as likelihood would be a minor injury would be caused. That gives me a severity rating of 4. And on a severity rating of 4, I need to just make sure that I've undertaken my control measures. So I'm checking that the lighting is adequate, I'm altering the activity if they become overcrowded on the courts, and I'm making sure my children play against a similar age and size. So the second hazard was players move onto a bench to sit on. So what I'm intending here is if players halfway through have picked a bench up and moved it, and they've put it across a fire door, put it across a cupboard door, or they've put it on the court somewhere where the players are playing, this could cause an injury that I've rated at 2. So it's unlikely for them to do something like that, but if it does happen, it could cause a minor injury, which is why I've rated severity as 2. Again, this gives me a multiplying them together an overall rating of 4, and so I'm suggesting that the control measures are moving the obstacle to a safe distance from the court, not blocking exits, and ensuring that the bench is used correctly, so it's the right way up and they're sitting on it properly. So I need to consider equipment in my badminton session, and I'm imagining that I'm be asking students to set the equipment up at the start and put it away at the end. There are heavy badminton posts with weights on the bottom, which if they attempt to lift them rather than use the rollers on them, they are very probable that they will injure themselves because these are very small children that could injure themselves. So it's probable that they would hurt themselves if they tried lifting it or did it incorrectly, and they would probably have a rating of a 2 injury, which would be a minor injury. So I'm multiplying those two together, the risk rating is 8. And at a risk rating of 8, I must make sure I've done all these things before doing the activity. So I've explained and demonstrated their procedure. for safe lifting, and I've trained the students how to do it. I also am using trained staff to assist students that I think might need help. If students are using the equipment incorrectly, or you're using the wrong size equipment, so I'm imagining here that the very littlies that are on my court have picked up the full length rackets. So it's possible that they could cause an injury to themselves. Actually, because they're a well behaved group, it's probably, I could change that to unlikely. However, there's no real risk of injury if they do, because I would stop the activity straight away. But also, if they were using the wrong racket, they may just strain something a little bit. So that gives me a rating of 1 times 3 is 3. So to prevent that happening, or to reduce that risk level of 3, I would direct the individuals to correct length rackets, and I'd get them to use sponge balls rather than shuttlecocks if that was a risk factor. And equipment. So if there's another activity going on in the other side of the sports hall, their equipment might come flying through. So I'm imagining a five-a-side football, it's raining outside, they're using the other half of the sports hall, and that ball could roll round through the curtain, or a child could overrun and run through into my area of play for badminton. So I'm saying the likelihood would be 3, which is possible, and the severity rating could be 3, so there could be a risk of minor severe injury. Multiplying together gives me a risk rating of 9. At a risk rating of 9, I need to ensure that I'm taking control measures. So I'm checking that the safety curtain is pulled right across. I'm explaining to my players the obstacle that could come through from next door and what impact that could have on them. And I'm ensuring that my activities take place away from that area of danger. I'm also considering that there could be a slippery court. On a slippery court, for example, if there is water, or if there's dust, or if they've used the wrong cleaning fluid, I'm imagining that the likelihood there would be very probable. If there's a puddle of water and children running around, a rating of 5, I'm imagining it's very probable that somebody will slip over on that puddle of water. And at a severity rating of 4, they could be at risk of major injury, because if your feet go from underneath you, you can very easily bang your head, knock yourself out as you hit the very hard sports hall floor. Multiplying these together gives me a risk rating of 20. At this risk rating, I would stop the activity. I would then put in place the following control measures. So I would check the courts are dry. I would check that they are not slippery, for example, free from dust. Then I would check that people have the correct footwear on. If I was satisfied with both of these conditions, I would be satisfied that this risk rating had dropped right down and that the activity could go ahead. That's my example of a risk assessment for badminton. My next risk assessment is going to be 4, and this is where you put your second risk assessment. Before the activity, I will have completed a risk assessment for badminton. When I go to start the activity, I need to do an immediate assessment and look at the environment and the state of the area which I'm going to be using. This will be an ongoing process throughout the duration of the activity. In this example, you look at the sports hall for badminton and see the environment and see what areas could cause risk. For example, you'll need to have a quick look round and check that the cricket nets are packed away neatly in the bags, that the football goals are folded up and chained to the wall. Here is an example where they are chained to the wall but they are left set up. This needs altering. You must also make sure that your badminton equipment is set out correctly so as not to fall over and cause injury. You should also check that when you are undertaking your activity, your participants are sat safely on benches the correct way up, not blocking fire exits and not blocking entrances to open cupboards. You should also check that activities take place away from objects that could cause risk. For example, here the person is too close to the curtain. In conclusion, this video shows all aspects related to health and safety for my 2 sports. Health and safety is best done by making sure risk assessment takes place and relevant changes are made.